Beginning in 2017, there's been renewed interest in the whole subject of UFOs, although they have been renamed by the government UAPs.
We got to figure out what is going on.
I view it as a mystery.
It's time to trust the witnesses.
I don't know what they are.
I know there's a lot more they're not saying.
So this is all coming out soon, I think.
And we should be afraid.
You know the old saying, I want to believe. That's me.
UFOs, or unidentified flying objects, are objects in the sky that cannot be identified by the observer. UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena, is a more recent term that is used in a similar way to UFO. This term is considered more neutral and less associated with the extraterrestrial explanations.
I think the whole UAP thing is kind of hilarious. UFO was a term that was coined by Edward J. Ruppelt in 1952. He was the head of Project Blue Book, which is the Air Force investigation into UFOs. He coined it because he didn't want it to call them flying saucers. The reason why he didn't want to call them flying saucers is because there was too much of a cultural connotation linking it to aliens. And he was like, no, I'm just studying weird phenomenon in the sky. As a scientist, I'm not saying they're aliens. I'm not saying they're little green men. So he wanted to get rid of the cultural baggage associated with the term. So he said, flying saucer is now a UFO. From flying saucer, you get, this idea of a structured metal craft, a flying saucer, to UFO, unidentified flying object, very vague. Doesn't have any of that connotation attached to it. Which, I can understand why he did that. He was actually just trying to change the conversation around the subject. But nowadays, they're calling them UAP for the same reason, because they want to disentangle it from the idea of aliens. In my opinion, 10 years down the line, UAP will also become synonymous with aliens. And so it's kind of like, what's the point? Just call them UFOs.
Gorgeous night. Have another ship going over the top of the house right now. Got really bright a second ago.
Well, I think one of the things that people should really think about is early on stories. And that's something that I've thought about and investigated myself personally. And one in particular that stands out to most is go back into African American history when you think about slavery. Now, there was a song, and it was called Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, Come and Taking Me Home. And if you start doing the research about that, you'll know it was an old slave song when they was out in the fields, but it was based upon a UFO. And the sighting of Swing Low, Come Down, Sweet Chariot, and Take Me Home. And then the other parts of that song was, I looked out over the Jordan, what did I see? Angels coming for me. Because the history of UFOs over water is still prominent today. And so all of those come back into a great history when it comes down to that phenomenon.
The more research you do, and that's probably a good question for people who just do research and not a field investigator like me, but I do know that Columbus, in his diary, when they were traveling on the 3 ships, he actually saw a light come out of the ocean. And that's in Columbus's diary. So we can go back to 1492 if you want. And then, of course, you have, the Roswell incident of 1947. But a week before that, there was a bunch of just armada of UFOs that were seen, over Mount Rainier. And the word flying saucer came from that. One of the reporters, was trying to describe what Kenneth Arnold had seen. And then, of course, that would be late June and then early July of 1947. Here you have Roswell.
Roswell, 1947, July 2nd, is when the world changed. You have to remember that right around that same time was when Kenneth Arnold saw a fleet of what he called flying saucers in, Washington State. And that was just like a few days before. And then you've got the Roswell crash.
That's a huge one, and I think that should be a convincing subject for anybody who really looks into it, just past the surface of it. Mostly because, and for the same reason that I find the Rendlesham Forest case interesting, is there was a moment of, hey, we saw UFOs. And then within 24 hours to 48 hours, the people in charge said, oh, no. That wasn't a UFO. No. That was something else. Why did they say it was a UFO in the first place? Why would they release anything that said that we saw a flying saucer or we found wreckage, and then within 24 hours backpedal and change their story? There was credible witnesses, plenty of documented sighting, even physical evidence in the case of Roswell, and the people that were there innocently just reported it as they saw it. And then within a certain amount of time, the higher-ups backpedaled that story.
People like Stanton Friedman and others have done a deep dive and spoke to many of the original witnesses. For myself, I'm close friends with the Marcel family. Denise Marcel actually worked with me as a field investigator. Of course, their grandfather was the first official on the debris field. Now, this was the one that was closest to the Roswell Air Base. Apparently, when this UFO hit, and some say that it was possibly a radar system that brought it down, that it had some effect on the craft. There are apparently bodies at the original crash site, which was Corona, New Mexico, closer to the border there. And they say that it hit so hard that the habitat, the life habitat that the beings were actually in, that crashed there, and the rest of the craft went back up in the air. And what they found in Roswell was this, what they called memory metal, which was very, very light, almost like tin foil. But you would crumple it up, and it would come back, and it would go back to its original shape, like it had an electrostatic charge of some kind. And with that, you have memory metal as a term. I know that Jesse Marcel Sr., that they shot a gun at this stuff, and it had no effect on it. They hit it with sledgehammers. They couldn't figure out what this material was. And so Jesse this was at the Mac Brazel Ranch, where the debris field was a square mile across, and it fanned out. And I've heard that the pieces of memory metal seemed to be moving in a breeze that wasn't there, like they were trying to go back into the original shape, which is very strange. He went and filled his car trunk up with some of this stuff, and they found some I-beams with strange hieroglyphics inside of the I-beams. You could only see them if you held it up to light, and then it would be like this iridescent purple color. So he had his trunk filled with this stuff. He was going to take it back to the Roswell Air Base, but he decided to go home first because he felt like this was something that he wanted his son to see it, and he wanted his wife to see it. He knew that this was not a weather balloon. He knew his weather balloons from his spaceships. So he took it home, and Jesse Jr. got to handle it and see it. That was Denise's father. Then, of course, he took it to the base, and they flew that to Wright-Patterson Air Base. That's where they would fly, like when we acquired a Japanese Zero during World War II. That's where they flew that, so they could reverse engineer and see how the thing worked. And that's apparently where the Roswell materials ended up. Some say White Sands, New Mexico, but I've heard Wright-Patterson, and that's probably where it ended up. And of course, then they made Jesse Sr. pose with you can see the photograph, and he looks embarrassed. He's like, look at the camera going, you gotta be kidding me. You gotta remember, this guy was a head of security for our only atomic air base. That was it. The Roswell Air Base is where they sent the Enola Gay from, which ended World War II. He was head of security. Man was highly, highly respected, but they expected him to say on record that he couldn't tell the difference between a simple weather balloon and a spaceship. They need to make that right someday. I know the Marcel family is hoping that someday that the government, the Pentagon, that they're going to come forward and say, you know what, we were trying to protect people from this, but this really happened, and Jesse Marcel was a hero, like Neil Armstrong. He should be in the history books. Instead, they made him look foolish.
There's photographs and a lot of people that were involved years later, once they were out of the military and done with things, flat out said, no, but that second report wasn't the right thing. I wasn't holding a weather balloon. That wasn't aluminum foil. That was something else. I had to say that. And some of the people involved with the Rendlesham Forest sighting say the same thing. The officer didn't talk about touching the UFO or having some sort of communication or anything the night of. Well, if you look at investigations and look at interviews with those guys, they did say something. And it was only later that it was blacked out and wiped from the record and a second statement was given. And I think when you start to see those things, you realize something's going on. If it was nothing, that much trouble wouldn't be involved. They wouldn't be going to that much work to cover up something or make a story for it.
That was probably one of my main focuses when I first started doing UFO investigations, was because I lived in California at the time, and Roswell was kind of easy access for me to. It's one of those big events that happened in U.S. history in ufology, and it was within my reach. I would visit Roswell, and I would talk to some of the actual people that lived in 1947. So Glenn Dennis, who was the mortician back in 47, and Walter Hott, who was in charge of doing press release for Roswell Army Air Force Base, or Walker Base. They were running the museum, the International UFO Museum in Roswell. And I'd been there so many times that they started to recognize me. And then Glenn Dennis started to recognize me. And after a period of time, he says, "Hey, Chuck," he says, "it's about time I give you the coordinates to where the debris site is." I said, "You have the coordinates to the debris site? To the actual site where Mac Brazel saw all that debris in 47? He says, "Yeah. Well, I have coordinates to the BLM marker there, but I'll tell you, it's only 100 or so yards from BLM marker." I said, "Well, yeah, I want them." So he gave me the coordinates. My sister and I jumped on the Jeep Wrangler, and we're looking at 2.5, 3 hours away from Roswell, because where the debris site is, it's closer to Corona, New Mexico. I remember we were on an old ranch road, and the GPS said go that way, and I said, "Well, I'm in a Jeep. I'm going to go across the desert." And we did, and we found the BLM marker, and then I found the place where he described, the contour, the way the land was, and somewhere I have a picture of me back then with my little metal detector out in the middle of the desert looking for UFO wreckage. And it was probably one of the most exciting things that happened to me pertaining to Roswell, actually able to go there for the very first time. Now, since then, because I've done so many investigations with Roswell, I've actually been on a couple of archaeology digs at the debris site. And the first archaeology dig I was on, I actually found a piece of metal, so that was pretty cool.
I think if you look beyond the surface of some of these bigger stories, you find them intriguing enough that they're more believable, I think, than not. Roswell, there was absolutely a very clear cover-up. Things were backpedaled, things were hidden, things were put away in almost a sloppy manner, like a very obvious manner that, oh, oops, we didn't mean to do that. Whether or not, say with Roswell, there's bodies or there's a full UFO somewhere in a deep underground bunker, maybe in Colorado. Can't say for sure about that except for, hearsay, but I think there's definitely something there. I think something crashed. There was wreckage of some kind.
When we start trying to figure out how is the government is being involved, or what are they doing about these UFOs?
Yeah, it's interesting. 1947, after Roswell, the same year, the Air Force was created, the NSA was created, and the CIA was created. There was also National Disinformation Act of 1947, where basically the government could lie to the American people as long as they gave you a little truth. Okay? And that's what they still are doing. Basically, they give you a little truth and a lot of untruth. And of course, that all started from what I believe in 1947 after the Roswell incident, but I'm sure it went through the whole Cold War too, of course.
First of all, we have to now make the determination that the government feels that these things are a threat to national security. And no wonder, because of the technology. And so therefore, I think that's part of why we got the secrecy from the government side. But what are they actually doing? Well, now they're trying to put in programs to actually say, okay, we're now going to go out and observe these UAPs. We're now going to investigate all along. They've been doing this all along. It's not nothing new. Since the 1940s, they've always had evidence. But I think they're trying to get more money, number one, because money is going to do this thing. And so therefore, they have to now change the narrative, put it out to the public, where for 60 years, they've cried wolf or saying, no, it doesn't exist. And for us in ufology, we've done that. We've don't trust the government. They're not. And now the government is saying, okay, UFOs are real or UAPs are real. And now we're trying to echo that. And the people are like, no, y'all done told us for 60 years, don't believe them. And I think they know that. They know they stay one step ahead. But they're trying to really get to a point, because now they can't hide the budgets. They can't hide the fact that they have a space force. What's the purpose of all that? So now we have to create the enemy behind it.
I mean, it could easily be disinformation. They could be releasing this stuff just to sort of, have us, look over here while we do this. And certainly the government and the military have done that for years. There's been plenty of times where they've let the public think it was UFOs when, it turned out to be spy planes, turned out to be stealth fighters, turned out to be a stealth bomber, turned out to be test craft.
Let's think about the purpose of the government when it comes down to information about what's happening or misinformation. And we have to look at the procedure to protect the secret itself. In some cases, you're going to get them to disseminate a little bit of stuff, just to, get our thirst, just to get the public's thirst. But when it comes down to stories like Richard Doty, all of these things, they got to protect the secret. And how they're going to do that is misinformation. It's going to be their procedure, because at this point, the information is out there. Now, how do we null it down? How do we make this person feels that this is not the real stuff? And if you go back to history, they already tried it with Project Blue Book, so they know it works. They did it with the Roswell in New Mexico. Oh, now it's a weather balloon, and we accepted it, most of the community. So they know misinformation is the bedrock of this, and it just depends on whatever narrative they want to use. And they seem to use the same ones, and misinformation is a key ingredient to guard the secret.
I personally feel like they're going in baby steps to actually letting us know what they know. It is the U.S. government. They're never going to tell us everything. I think that's a pipe dream. But I feel like this is baby steps to letting us in a little bit more.
Yes, there's information that's being hidden from us, not only from our government, but from other investigators too. They find out stuff and they feel, stuff that I kind of know I'm reluctant to tell everything about, because it could scare the hell out of you, and I don't want to do that.
And a lot of the UFO evidence is actually anecdotal. People call me up. I got a couple of phone calls today from people who've seen things that they don't understand. They get out their cell phones and, they photograph it, and they'll send me the photos or the videos or whatever they have. There are between 8,000 and 10,000 such reports every year that are actually reported. I'm sure there are 5 times as many that aren't reported. So people see things in the sky all the time.
Is California a hot spot?
Well, it is a hot spot. We were in the Malibu area where, there's been a lot of sightings. And of course, I wanted to go down to the San Diego area where there's still a lot of sightings. And recently, the sightings off of the destroyers, off of the
that was
Navy carriers, Tic Tacs and stuff. So that's another place that's active. I actually contracted for microchip company, semiconductor company in San Diego. So for a couple of years on and off. And so I go down there and I talk to the people, and check out and see if there's any sightings and stuff. It's kind of fun.
I think that the Tic Tac event that happened, I think that that's what opened up disclosure that we're enjoying right now. It was on the front page of the New York Times. The military themselves said, we can't explain it. Yes, this happened. I'm very good friends with Kevin Day, who is the strike force commander on the radar deck that day on the USS Princeton. I think that it's our Roswell, except this time the government isn't hiding everything. This time it's actually it got out there, and it changed the world.
Tic Tacs have been around forever. I've been investigating Tic Tacs for a long time, and I've been talking to military people who've seen Tic Tacs. That's nothing new for me. What's new, though, is for our pilots to come out publicly with this information, and that is way cool.
This is why the ridicule has gone down. There's still ridicule out there if you say you've been abducted or you've seen a UFO or something, but it's so far less than it used to be. I got to watch that. It's almost like a fuse that just went out. And it went out because of that New York Times article in 2017. The Tic Tac was a very, very real thing. And we continually get sightings from the same area. Really good sightings. I've had pilots, boat captains, and all kinds of people that have seen similar things out there. The most impressive thing about the Tic Tac was that this thing moved at Mach 18, 18 times the speed of sound. And it went that fast, but it didn't create one single sonic boom. And that's impossible. Scientifically, as we know science, there should have been 18 sonic booms. The thing was doing 90-degree turns. It was playing cat and mouse with a squadron of jets that they finally sent out to intercept. At first they thought that the radar was going wonky, but after a week of this, they knew that the radar systems were working perfectly. And these things were coming down from low Earth orbit to sea level and then shooting back up. They saw this on the radar for like 5 days, and they finally sent a squadron of planes out there, and the rest, of course, is history.
There's a myth that the government may be instrumental in creating these Tic Tacs to really get a public awareness, to really get the push behind it through Congress to say, okay, we have a threat that we need to do this. But if you really look at, and for me, it was, I think so at first, because when you listen to the audio, especially of the Tic Tac video and the excitement of the pilots, oh, go, wow, look at that. But then it all changed, and there was an interview that was done with Commander Fravor, and this was on 60 Minutes, and you look at his eyes, look at his face, he's disturbed. He saw something that he'd never seen before. He saw something that was not conventional for a pilot. And I think that's what it is. The military do not want the public to know that our Top Gun fighters, our serious fighters that are out there, could have some type of fear or something in that air that commands a little better technology. Well, we know that there's those observables, transmedium technology. We know that it has, cloaks, it can cloak, and all of these things that we don't have that technology, and we should be afraid.
My personal feeling is that the government has been in contact for decades. They've had proof of this and maybe even have direct contact, and maybe they still do. And they're doing this in an effort to sort of soft pitch the idea to us, get us more comfortable with the idea that maybe these things do exist. Maybe it's okay. Maybe it's not scary. Because I know for a fact if the government just came out tomorrow and said, hey, by the way, we've been in talks with an alien species from another planet and we have been for years, I think a large percentage of the society would freak out. Fortunately now, it's 2022, it's a softer subject for people. More and more people believe now than they did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago. It's an acceptable subject. It used to be a thing where if you were into UFOs or in any of this stuff, it was almost embarrassing. You didn't really want people to know that was your hobby. It could get you fired. It could lose friends. There was a lot of repercussion to something silly like that. It's not that silly now. People realize it's like, maybe that's a thing. It's not embarrassing anymore, so it's okay to talk about it. And I think that's what the government's doing. They're saying, well, you're okay with this now. Here's some footage that we just happened to find. And we don't know what it is, but here's this. I think they know what it is.
What amazes me is that they show the same video for like the past 5 years going, oh, this is new information. Yeah, it's insane because you've got especially with our NASA, which never a straight answer. they show amazing technology out there with 4K and 8K and technology where everything's zoomed in and you can see things from miles and miles away, thousands of miles away. It's such clarity. But when it comes down to a UFO, you've got the worst camera fisheye lens view you'll have on there, all kind of speckled colors. And you're like, oh, what is that? They do that with like a tic-tac-toe. They'll show you something from a black and white or infrared camera, yet they have views from all around the world for years now of high def visions of all these different ships that have been out there for a long time.
Why don't they show us?
They don't want us to know about that. They're keeping that technology to themselves. First of all, NASA has been taking billions of dollars every single year, to actually use it toward technology to look for ETs, which they've already had contact with ETs since the 60s.
Are we really gaining any technology from some of these encounters? Now, of course, we do know that the secret is the secret, so they won't really tell us. But one of the major things was anti-gravity. We all remember that was the biggest thing because we know these spacecraft did not use propulsion that our system used. So anti-gravity has always been out there. It has always been one of their main test subjects. And it goes all the way back to World War II and Hitler and the rest of them was using or had been known to start that program. And when one of them and the Germans came over to NASA. So that was probably one of the biggest things. And since then, anything after that has been like, phew. Now, okay, our technology has changed. We got planes flying faster, supersonic speeds. We have different type of weapons now. We have nuclear capabilities. But when it comes down to transmedium, which is the biggest threat of it all, and this is when you have something that can come from space, air, and water, backwater, air, and space, and we have nothing that can do that. And this is the most alarming part of technology that persists when it comes down to national security. And this is what we're trying to figure out. How do they have something that can hit the water with the forces that it has, which will dismantle anything that crashes, go into the water, travel just as fast, come back out, and then go to space all at the same time? For us, we would have to go dock, we have to go get ready for a space rocket and all these things, and they can do it instantaneously.
Well, I think there's a couple reasons. There's a couple theories. One is that they're checking up on our technology, keeping tabs on our development and our evolution, so to speak. Seeing what we are, where we're at, what we can and can't do. There's that theory. The other theory is that they know where we're at and they don't like it. That we're a dangerous species with very dangerous weapons, and they want to keep tabs on us for that reason. Other people think that it's malevolent, that they're checking because they want to take over or invade or whatever. There's a few different reasons that could be. Personally, I think they're just checking us out. Just like when you go to the zoo and you go see the animals, or you go to the park and you see a duck. Well, you want to give the duck some bread or come over and see what that duck's doing. Or there's a dog in the neighborhood. Maybe you want to pet that dog, but you want to make sure the dog's not going to bite you. You still investigate the dog. You still go over there and have a look at it, see what thing. Has he got a collar on? What's he doing? I tend to think that's more like what they're doing. That they're just keeping tabs. They're checking on us.
So when you think about the military side of things. You know, I've investigated stories. In fact, I had a conversation with Bob Salas, and he is the Minuteman that was the captain over the Maelstrom Air Force Base, where the aliens actually came in and turned off our nuclear weapons. He was in the silo at the time. And of course, for him and anybody else, it was a serious situation. And you think about something disarming our missiles. But let's think about this for a minute. Were they really trying to send a message?
Starting launch sequences or shutting down electronics and things like that, I don't know that that is necessarily being done on purpose. I feel like that's probably more likely interference, something not jiving with their technology and with ours. Or maybe it is. Maybe they're just seeing, hey, can we do this? Let's see if we can mess with their stuff. Or maybe they're saying, hey, we can mess with your stuff. Here's how we're going to do it.
Don't mess with us. Don't bother us. This is your most fierce arsenal, and we can just turn it off. And so what about these nuclear weapons? Now, but it does take a different turn, though. When you think about people saying an invasion and what would happen on Earth. Now, one of the things that humans can't handle is radiation. And when we hear a lot about radiation when they come into these encounters. But now these extraterrestrials seem to bring radiation with them. So probably our nuclear weapons may be a recharging station. It could be a lot of things of why they are interested in that. But at the end of the day, turning them off is saying, hey, don't use it. But at the same time, it's a message. That's my opinion. I think that's what it was.
Disclosure has already happened. And what we're doing right now, this is disclosure. Talking about this in a lucid and scientific fashion, that's disclosure. But I think that we are eventually going to see these technologies, and they're going to be us doing them. And that's our future. That's the future of ufology and what this will lead to.
Now we are in some exciting times. We're now in the time of disclosure. Everybody's so thrilled about it, which I am too, because we want to know, we want the truth. But then I start really thinking about it. How much of disclosure are they going to give us? And when you start really thinking about it, yeah, if we find out there is some new technology that was discovered or a whistleblower, they're going to disclose what we know, okay? But they're not going to just say, come in, you guys. Here's all the other doors that you doesn't know. We're just going to go ahead and just tell you everything. Probably never will happen. Now, are we further along than we were? Or do we want to just get the facts that, all right, this thing is real? Because it's about redemption. It's about people who've been ridiculed over the years, people who lost their careers, saying that this UFO thing was just crazy. But now when you got disclosure and now they're saying, okay, you know what, we want to admit there was a problem. There are some things happening. And so I think that alone will be enough, but it's not going to really happen until we get that extraterrestrial who pops up in front of one of these White Houses or somebody and comes out and raises his hand and say, hi, everybody, I'm such and such from such and such place. Yes, I'm real. And that's going to be the disclosure everybody's really looking for.
You know, Brazil was pretty open with UFOs. I know Spain was. UK, not so much, especially with Rendlesham Forest.
The Rendlesham Forest incident, also known as Britain's Roswell, occurred in December 1980 at a military base in Suffolk, England. According to multiple witnesses, including military personnel, a UFO landed in the nearby forest, and strange lights and other phenomena were observed.
It's an area called Rendlesham Forest, which is a wooded area between two military bases. At the time, both bases were being run by the U.S. military, and they had a night where there were some anomalous lights in the woods. Two of the officers went out to investigate, guards, and they reported seeing these strange lights moving around in different ways, and they went further in the woods to see, well, what was it? Was it somebody with a flashlight? Or because nobody should have been out there. And they came across a cleared area and actually found a craft on the ground. Described it as a triangular-shaped craft on a tripod, like 3 landing gear. And they went through the whole thing, described it, the sound it made, the warmth coming from it. They made very detailed description of what the surface looked like. There was writing on it. One of the two actually approached it and touched it. They reported this whole thing back that night. One of the officers with more men went out the next day to go have a look for themselves, found the cleared area, and didn't find any craft or anything like that on the ground, but they did see fresh damage on the trees where they'd been scraped and banged up, depressions on the ground. They took readings and found a slightly higher radioactive readings in the area where the landing was supposed to be, as opposed to the surrounding area. They found what looked like where something had landed and made a mark on the ground. And then this, over the course of several days, the same guys went out again because they had another report of anomalous lights, just like the first night. And that same officer went out with a group of guys and went out looking for it, saw the same lights, tried to chase them down, saw these lights doing weird maneuvers in the sky, different colors, things like that. And the officer in question actually even had an audio recorder. Apparently it was his habit to keep a tape recorder with him to keep notes. And so he kept that running the entire time. And a while back, that was actually released to the public. You can go out on the internet, you can find it and listen to it. And you can hear him and the other men describing what they're seeing, the lights and the movement. It's very intriguing.
The incident received widespread media coverage at the time, and the military initially denied that anything out of the ordinary had occurred. However, later government documents and witness testimony have suggested that the incident was covered up. The incident remains unexplained to this date.
A lot of doubters say that it was a lighthouse. There was a lighthouse in the area, it was near the coast, or that maybe it was a hoax. Some board officers trying to pull a joke. But this went over the course of several days. A fairly good number of people on the military base doing this, going on record no less. I don't see why there's no benefit in that. It's not like they're going to make money off of it. They weren't going to get famous from it. This was 1980. Most people, most pilots, most military tend to not report those things because that can hurt your career. At the very least, it makes you look like a fool. At best, it gets you in trouble. I tend to believe that this was a real thing. Another unknown case because there was no actual photographs, no other witnesses outside of these guys, although I believe there was probably 6 to 8 separate witnesses, but no proper physical evidence. So nobody can say for sure what did or didn't happen, but it was a genuine unknown. The lighthouse theory is fine, except that later on at a point, the lighthouse keeper was interviewed, and he stated that the lighthouse doesn't shine in that direction. Because why would the lighthouse shine inland, towards the forest? And a lighthouse light's only going to move one direction. It's not going to jump around. It's not going to change colors. A lot of the explanations of what it probably really was don't make enough sense to me. The Rendlesham Forest, that's my favorite historical famous case.
When it gets down to international stories, there's a lot of evidence out there. But one I think people should really look into, it's a place, a volcano that's in Mexico right now. And the Mexican government have taken the time to actually put live stream cameras on this mountain 24 hours a day. And what we have seen, enormously happening all the time is you see UFOs or whatever it is, UAPs, going in and out this volcano. Now, what makes it compelling that the descents are controlled. It slows down as it going in, and the volcano is active. So we know we have no technology that goes into an active volcano. So let's think about that as more international proof. Brazil is a hotbed. In fact, they have already announced their first National UFO Day, and had Lou Elizondo there, in which I'm going, wait a minute, how did they get there before us?
It's us. It's here in the U.S. We're not the ones that are making a problem. I think media. As long as I've been doing this, anytime I'm on a news show, they may make jokes. You know, before my spot comes on, they'll play something from the X-Files, or they'll make a joke, or even after I'm on, they'll make another joke. I want to just go back and slap them. It's funny now because I can laugh at them, because all the times I've been on the news for years and they made fun of me, what are they thinking now? Are they going to make fun of the Pentagon? Are they going to make fun of our military? Or are they going to make fun of our pilots? Especially all those people out there that say they don't exist. You know, that our pilots aren't really seeing UFOs. Really? Are you as good as a fighter pilot? Do you have the background, the experience, the education that our fighter pilots have to make that comment? Of course not. You don't, unless you're another fighter pilot. So the same thing with the media. They have no background, they have no experience in this, yet they're the first to make fun of it. And they still do. They still make fun of the stuff. They still have their little jokes aside. It's reality TV is all it is.
Internationally, I think it's something that's out there, but then I'm sure the U.S. government is saying, don't you guys tell something before we do. And so when you think about Brazil, those stories has always encompassed our military intervening. So obviously, we're probably got our hands throughout the world when it comes down to other international incidents.
Well, it's pretty bright.
There have been a number of recent UFO sightings reported around the world. In December 2020, the U.S. Navy confirmed that it had released 3 videos of unexplained aerial phenomena, UAPs, that were captured by Navy pilots in 2004 and 2015. The videos show objects moving in ways that appear to defy the laws of physics. Additionally, in late 2020, the U.S. Air Force's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ATIP, released a report detailing a number of recent UFO sightings and encounters with UAPs. The report includes accounts from military pilots, radar operators, and other witnesses who described objects that are able to fly at high speeds, change direction quickly, and perform maneuvers that seem impossible for any known aircraft.
Well, I mean, aside from the most current, the Tic Tac sightings, which I find fascinating, another one, it's not very current, but more modern day, would be the Phoenix Lights, which happened in the 90s. And that was a combination of things going on there. Throughout the evening when that occurred, there was tons of phone calls into the local authorities. People were seeing something flying over the city. And at the same time, then there's plenty of documented footage from people with private video cameras and from news stations of these crazy lights that were going on. Most of that kind of got explained away a little bit. It was another case where everybody said it was one thing, and the next day the military said, "Oh no, we were testing things. There were flares." Well, a lot of the footage that you see in the news, I think, are flares. I've seen the military flares. I've seen it myself, and they look like that. They look like flares moving around and burning out and drifting and behind the mountain. And that very easily explains what was being seen in the video. The problem with that is that the location where the flares were being recorded is not the same location where everybody was calling in the reports of seeing something flying over the town. People were calling in reports of seeing a triangular shaped craft with lights on it flying over the houses and flying across town. That doesn't necessarily match up with the lights that were being seen. And I don't know that this for sure. My theory is that those are military flares and the military put those out on purpose to distract from what they knew was flying across the town. But there were so many witnesses, so many credible witnesses, including local city officials, school teachers, police officers, who saw something flying over the town. Not just the lights, the flares or whatever they might have been, but they saw a craft. It had to be 2 separate things happening on the same night. People saw something. They absolutely did, and it was not just flares. If you go on the internet, you can look up the Phoenix Lights and you'll see the video. I'm pretty sure those are flares. But that is not what people were seeing, I think. At least I think that's what it is.
The Phoenix Lights were witnessed by thousands of people, including then Governor Fife Symington III. At the time, Symington made a public statement that the lights were flares dropped by the military during a training exercise. However, Later, in 2007, Symington publicly admitted that he had lied about the flares and that he had actually seen the lights himself. He stated that they were otherworldly. Symington's change of story has added to the mystery surrounding the Phoenix Lights incident and has led some to believe that the lights may have been of extraterrestrial origin.
There is so much going on in this planet, especially now, since the Pentagon is now officially researching UFOs. And it's really exciting time as a UFO investigator, because we've been trying to get these guys on board to come out publicly for years and years and years. But because things change, because of social media, because people talk, even our own pilots and our own military are talking, and they can't keep them quiet. But then again, too, it's a new generation of military. So they're not going by old school anymore. They're going like, okay, get some new people, on board that are running this, and I want to find out too. So it's really interesting what we see now. It's an exciting time.
So let's now dive into what's happening at our airports these days. And we do know that there is a movement right now for the FAA to begin to work with the government to get the pilots comfortable with reporting these sightings. And there's a big difference out there when it comes down to this. And pilots are reporting all the time when they think they can, because there's a fear factor as of today that they don't want to report these things. It could cost them their jobs. But now the government there's a program they're trying to put in place where there's going to be some accountability, and to tell the pilots, we want that information. Because this last ODNI report said that national security, aviation security, and then also the stigma was the top three things for FAA side that they was trying to accomplish. And knowing that we have a lot of these UAPs. There were stories of collisions that had happened, but then most recently, John Greenwald Jr. Released a FOIA Act of an FAA transmission recently that came out of the pilots communicating with each other, several different airlines, that they all spotted a UAP. And this thing actually flew underneath one of these planes and disabled some of the controls within this airplane. And you can hear the pilots talking about it. And this is probably one of the first big releases. And now for me, I think that we got to be really cautious about this, because people want to know, is it a threat? We got thousands of planes out there, thousands of them. And so they're not deliberately trying to down an aircraft, but we do have some coming up missing. But my question for everyone is, do we really want that type of transparent disclosure when it comes down to airplanes? And what I mean by that is, I just got off a plane. So do I want to get ready to board, and I'm handed a pamphlet out of transparency and said, by the way, we had some encounters up there at this last flight. Some of our instruments went out, but we landed perfectly fine with the skill set of our pilots. But you want disclosure, we want to do this. Or the airline steward is saying, okay, put your oxygen mask on. But by the way, we had 30,000 feet on our last flight. There was a swarm of UFOs came, and we had to do some evasive maneuvers. But we just want y'all to know, that's why. It wasn't turbulence that you thought. We just letting you know. Do we want that type of disclosure? I don't think we're ready for that.
What struck me recently in the whole field of the UFO phenomena is that it's failed to come up with news stories. Most of the discussion about UFOs and UAPs is historical stuff, with the exception of the UAPs. That's fairly recent. That's 5 years ago or whatever. But almost all the rest are the historical stories. Roswell is the number one story there. And it sounds like the aliens have sort of lost interest in us, if you believe all that.
I do get hoaxes. There was one guy who was making, it was very elaborate. He was making these balloon constructs. And I think he had a bunch of people working with them, and they would be helium balloons, but they would put on paper mache or foil, and they had one that looked like Sputnik. And it fooled a lot of people. I mean, people are still talking about that like it was a UFO. No. It was a party animal. This guy was trying to hoax people with. And he would have people come out to the top of a mountain with telescopes and stuff. And he actually, I played spy. I went and I watched from the periphery how they were doing this. He didn't know I was spying on him, but I was. He didn't know who I was yet. But somebody put in a UFO report, and I put two and two together. I had heard about what this guy was doing. He literally has a friend with a Piper Cub, a little old Piper Cub, this little plane, would release these balloon constructs in the clouds. The guy would get real meditative looking, and then he would say, "They're here." And so everybody's got their binoculars, and they're going, ooh, you know. And I actually confronted the guy, handed him my card and said, "I know what you're doing and I know how you're doing it. And, you know, your pilot friend made the mistake of wagging his wings at the crowd when he left." You know, I asked the guy behind me, "Well, who's that guy wagging his wings at us right after UFOs showed up?" And the guy said, "Oh, those are the men in black. We see them every single time." And that was an elaborate hoax. The guy was getting on TV. He was making money off of it. You know, he'd charge for events. Other times I'll have somebody, like I had a CGI person put in a very well-produced video that was just too good to be true. And, you know, the little daughter danced past the camera, really being cute at one point. And it was like, this looks really produced. And I did a little bit of detective work, and I found that the person actually had an online resume that said CGI work, realer than real life. And then I did a little bit more research, and I found, like, on social media, this person and friends yucking it up at a party, you know, at the computer, and it was like, okay, I know exactly what happened. You know, she produced a CGI video, tried to submit it, tried to fool MUFON, and I guess she would have probably used that on her resume. I even fooled MUFON. Yeah. So unfortunately, we do get hoaxes. It muddies the field up. I mean, some of them are funny. Some of them actually, they make me laugh once I've figured out what was going on. But it's not good to fool people. And I'll tell you, the UFO phenomenon in itself is so interesting that you can't make up anything that's better than the real thing. It's just always kind of a downer, because it's not as good as the real phenomenon.
The red flag always comes up for me when I talk to somebody, and they say, "Well, I know exactly why they're here." This is just a red flag, you know, or because do you really know? You don't know. You're just speculating, unless you have a written document or something in their handwriting. All you can do is, "I think I know." But for those people, and then the other people that say, "I see aliens all the time," I go, "Well, can you take a picture like one time, give it to me?" "Oh, they don't like their pictures taken," you know, and they're never around when I have my camera. And I'm like, "Okay, talk to you later."
Well, I think being an investigator among friends, one of their thoughts probably is, "Roderick, what evidence, or is this really happening?" And when I give it some thought, and I try to remove myself from working on case files that I know we're not alone in this universe. But what would someone who is new to this, where would I send them, or what would I provide to them to give them? And so I start thinking about ancient civilizations. When you go back to pyramid structures and technology and all of that, that's enough to awaken that curiosity to someone, to get them to say, "Okay, wait a minute, who built those?" You go back and look at the Dogon tribes and all of the star constellation information, and now you want to even go biblically or start looking into religious things and documents that have shown that there's possible extraterrestrial interactions. And so the evidence is going to begin with the research, because we don't have, outside of the stories, Roswell, the bodies recovered, we don't have physical public reference for that average person to say, "Prove it to me," except for things that are unexplained that will then lead them to the curiosity, saying, "Oh, wait a minute, this may be true."
I kind of like the UFO lore, if you want to call it that, because some of it is, colorful and even dramatically interesting. I mean, the whole Roswell thing. Anybody who's been to Roswell will recognize that the best thing that ever happened to the city of Roswell was to be associated with aliens somehow, right? Because the entire downtown is given over to the sale of, artifacts or tchotchkes, really, of UFOs, right? Or aliens or something. There's a UFO museum downtown, a converted movie theater, that sort of thing, right? So for them, it's been good for business, if you will, the aliens. Today, everybody has a camera, both a still camera and a video camera. They have that in their pockets, right? And it's a pretty good camera. And yet, somehow, the aliens have still managed to avoid any really convincing footage. Now, there's a fellow at Harvard, Avi Loeb is his name, and he's a professor of astronomy at Harvard, and he has started a project to try and build equipment to get high-resolution photos of these UAPs and UFOs. I mean, you got to admire that. That's a good thing to do. I don't imagine they're going to find anything, but, that's just my personal opinion, and it may not be that way. But at least he's trying. And I think that that's important.
The future is we'll be building them and flying them, I hope. That's the MUFON's creed, is the investigation of UFOs for the benefit, the scientific investigation of UFOs for the benefit of humanity. Well, that's how it would benefit us, is if we had that technology.
It's difficult to predict what the future holds for ufology. In recent years, there has been renewed interest in UFOs and UAPs as a result of various governments releasing previously classified information and reports on UAP sightings. It's possible that this renewed interest in UFOs could lead to more funding for research and investigation into the phenomenon. On the other hand, if the interest in UFOs and UAPs is not sustained, research and investigation into the phenomenon may decline.
There are a lot of people that are interested in how the propulsion works, and things like zero-point energy are often spoken of. Some of Tesla's ideas and all that. I think that it's making us look at technology differently, and it's cut away some of the limitations that I think that we self-imposed on ourselves. It's just like Ben Rich from Lockheed Skunk Works said in one lecture he gave at UCLA, he said that we have the technology right now to take E.T. home. He said all the stuff you've seen on Star Trek and Star Wars, we can do and even better, but it's all locked up in black programs and the public will never see it. It's unfunded programs. Just the idea and the technologies that we've witnessed through this phenomenon have led us already to design stuff of our own, and maybe we'll see some things like anti-gravity soon. I think we have it, but it's not, I think it's hard to do. I think it's probably expensive to do, and it's going to open up Pandora's box again. You're going to have to explain where they got it. And as soon as, people start going up into outer space, they're going to start seeing things that they probably aren't supposed to see. So this is all coming out soon, I think.